right, we have two homes here that we get to tour. The first one was built in 1851. It's called the Hunter House. The Hunter family were the ones that lived here. And Mr. Hunter was I believe he was a miller. He made a decent living for his family, but he was a very middle class person. So he had this nice, comfortable home. It wasn't real fancy, but it kept his family warm and dry. And so this gives you an example of just your typical middle class home in Northville in the 1850s. What's special about this architecture, if you look at the peak in the middle and then the two on the sides, it's called hen and chicks architecture. Think of a mother hen spreading out her wings and holding her little baby chicks under her wings. That's what this kind of reminds you of, right? So that was quite popular in the 1850s here in Northville. So let's go inside and see how the Hunters live. So this part of the house, this front half, is where the Hunters would entertain their guests. So you'll notice on the walls there is stenciling, and if you're not sure what stenciling is, think of like a piece of tin with a pattern cut out, and they would take their purple brush and stamp the purple parts, and they would take their yellow brush, stamp the yellow parts, and then move it and do it again, and move it and do it again. And they did that all the way around. In the side rooms, you'll also see other kinds of stenciling. So that was very popular at the time, and it was a way to impress their guests. They didn't have wallpaper yet, so that was the way they kind of decorated this room. The other thing special about this room is they have this really pretty, it almost looks like Greek columns or something around their doorways and around their windows. You won't see any of that in the other part of the house where the family really just did most of their daily living. So this was for guests, this was to impress their guests. So inside these two side rooms, you'll see a little bit. Let's go over to this one. So a desk area, some books, you'll see a spinning wheel, a gun. Someone said to me once, oh, his name was Hunter. That must mean he was a hunter. And yes, he was a hunter, but not because of his name. You had to be a hunter in the 1800s. That was the only way you were going to eat meat, was if you went and hunted it yourself. So it was very important to have a gun. And then the spinning wheel is very important to help make your fabrics and make your blankets and things like that. Over here, there is something called a melodeon. We might look at it and think of it as an organ or a piano. And you see a cello there. Music was very important. You do not see any televisions. You do not see any radios or, of course, any video games or anything like that. So for entertainment for their guests, they would play music. They would sing songs together. They might read poetry. They might listen to Bible readings. Things like that is what the families did to entertain each other. On the walls, you'll see some cross-stitch samplers. Here's one with the ABCs on it. Looks like somebody made this in 1834. And what's really interesting about this one on this wall, this was made by a little girl named Lucy Randolph. Now, there's a very popular street in Northville called Randolph Street. So the Randolph family were pretty prominent as some of the first settlers here in Northville. Think about children nowadays. They go to school, when they come home, they might have a little homework to do, but there's so many activities, right? They're in scouts, they're in dance, they're in soccer, sports, music, so many different things, gymnastics. Back then, you didn't have all those activities. You came home, you did your chores, and then you had to find things to do to make your own fun, the way I said it to my kids when they were growing up. And one of the things Lucy learned to do as a 6-year-old was to do cross stitch, where you take a thread and you make little tiny X's over and over and over to make her alphabet sampler. And you know how in the school I made my D backwards, because I said a lot of first graders do things backwards. That's pretty common even today. Well, even Lucy, she made her Y upside down on the sampler. Typical 6-year-old. I thought that was pretty interesting. And not only that, she didn't have room for her Z, so she moved the Z up here where there was room next to that Z. I think that was pretty resourceful of her. Another one of these wood-burning stoves to try to keep this room warm. The Hunter family would not have wanted to waste wood and have to heat both of these rooms all the time. So they only had this stove going when there were people in this part of the house that they were entertaining. Otherwise, there used to be doors here that they would close, so they would only have to heat the back half of the room. Now there's something interesting on here. They would fill this up with water. You could put a cup here to heat a cup of water, like to maybe make a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. But this was also very useful. If you think today, especially, I don't know if kids do this much, but I know parents like to do it because our circulation isn't as good as we get older and our feet get really cold. So we might have something on our beds like an electric blanket or an electric mattress pad to warm up our sheets. Well, what they did back then was they said this was an 1800s bed warmer. They would fill this with water, they would heat it, they would put it under their blankets a little while before they went to bed. You know, move it around, keep it there, let it warm up the sheets, and then take it out, and they would have a nice cozy bed to get into. Again, pretty resourceful. So now let's go into this part of the house. This is where they did most of their living. And this house was equipped with a furnace. I don't know if it was original to the house, but I know that they did eventually get a furnace. And there is a basement here. Right now it's just used for storage. And there is an upstairs that had extra bedrooms, but we don't have access to that right now. So let's talk about this area. This was the main area where they lived. This is the kitchen, and here they have their cook stove. So again, this was a wooden stove. You had to feed it wood constantly to keep it hot to make their meals. Then if you think about not only cooking, but bathing, you know, something we didn't talk about with the school or the church, but we'll talk about it now. Both of those buildings had a door leading to the back, just like this one does. Why is that there? If you look over here, nope, that's not it. There's no indoor plumbing when these homes were built, or for the school, or for the church. You had to go outside and use an outhouse. But an outhouse is just like our porta-johns today. They have toilets, but what else do you need in a bathroom? You need a sink, right? So here's their sink. This is just here to show what the pump would look like outside of the well. Of course, the well was not in the house, so they'd have to go out, pump the water, fill up their pitcher, bring it in. To wash their hands, they would pour the water over the bowl and wash their hands. So that was their sink. Then, what else do you have in a bathroom? You have a shower or a bathtub. Well, they didn't have the luxury of a shower, but they did have a bathtub. But unlike our bathrooms now, where you have the privacy of going and taking your bath, oh no. The bathtub was right here, right in the middle of the kitchen where everybody could see you. Now, you don't see a faucet leading into that bathtub, do you? Nope, they'd have to go outside, take their kettle, pump their water, fill up the kettle, bring it over here, feed the stove with wood, get it burning hot to boil the water. Then they pour the water in there. But this little kettle certainly is not enough water for a bath. So they'd have to go out, do it again. They would do that at least 7 times. Then they would have enough water to take their bath. After all that work, do you think only one person took a bath? No, the entire family would take a bath using the same bath water. So, think about that. A mother, a father, all the children. And I want you to think about the last one to take it. Some people think, oh, well, it would have been like the father, he worked the hardest, maybe he should go first, or maybe he should go last, or whatever. The baby was always last. And you think, oh no, babies, we always want them to have clean things. If they drop their pacifier on the ground, we're gonna wash it before we get it back to them. We sterilize their bottles, we wash their clothing and everything. Why would the baby be put in this dirty bath water after the mother, the father, and the older brothers and sisters all took a bath? Well, babies don't know that they're not supposed to pee in the water, right? Nobody wants to take a bath in the water if the baby's had a little accident in there. So that's why the baby was always last. You might have heard an old-fashioned phrase saying, don't throw the baby out with the bath water. That's where that comes from, because the baby would be the last one. Make sure you get the baby out before you lift up the bucket to throw out the water. That's where that comes from. All right, so in this house, we also have their pantry where they would keep their dishes and some of their foods. You do not see a refrigerator here. These would just be like their fresh vegetables and things that could be at room temperature. But then over here, they would have had an ice box. They would get chunks of ice that would be delivered, like by a horse and wagon, to keep some of their foods cold that they needed to keep cold. Then you see some of the bedrooms. Here's the children's bedroom here. You can even see that there's a little cradle for the babies, some authentic baby shoes there. Millrace does a really good job of making sure that everything they display is very authentic to that time period. If you're wondering what this is hanging on the wall, that's called a crinoline, or a hoop that the women and the girls would wear under their skirts to have like a big poofy skirt or a dress. You notice that there are pegs there for their clothes. They didn't have closets because they didn't need closets. They didn't have a lot of clothes they had to store. Like the mother would have had maybe 3 dresses. She would have a dress to go to church, maybe a dress to go into town, and a dress that she would just wear around the house all the time. So all you really needed were a few pegs. If we come over here, I'll show you some interesting things in the parents' bedroom. So here, you can come in this way. Here are the pegs that the mother and father would have for their clothing, and again, the crinoline for the mother. This on the floor, you might not know what that is, but that's called a chamber pot. If you get up in the middle of the night and need to use the bathroom and you don't want to put your winter coat on and go outside and fight the snow and the elements, you could just use the chamber pot and then the next morning take it out and dump it in the outhouse. And so that's often what they did. You'll see those in the other house we're going to go into too. This is kind of an interesting thing. So the mattresses were usually stuffed with straw, but there were ropes that crisscrossed under the mattress to keep it firm. The only thing is, those ropes would be firm at first, but then after you sleep in them during the night, and you're tossing and turning, they're going to get loose and they're going to start sagging in the middle. So what the parents would have to do is they'd put the rope inside here, just like that, pretend my finger is the rope, and then they would twist it every night before they got into bed, and that would tighten those ropes. That's where the phrase comes from that we still use today. When we tuck our children in, we say, good night, sleep tight. And it looks like they have another bed warmer here, kind of like the one we talked about over there. This is really fascinating. Apparently, when they moved this house, this shoe, this old 1800 shoe, it reminds me of like the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz, fell out of the wall. Apparently there was a superstition back then that if you hid a shoe in the wall, it would ward off evil spirits, or maybe it would bring the family good luck. I heard it told both ways. So it's kind of interesting. If you're scared as a kid and you're scared of ghosts, maybe hide a shoe in the wall and nothing will ever happen. Okay.